Before we come to First Minister's questions, I know that members will wish to join me in welcoming three visitors to the gallery today. They are the Chairman of the Council of Federation of the Russian Federation, Mr. Sergei Mironov, the Ambassador of the Russian Federation to the United Kingdom, His Excellency Alexander Yakovenko, and the Austrian Ambassador to the United Kingdom, His Excellency Dr. Emil Brix. And we now come to questions to the First Minister. Question number 1 is from Ian Gray.
To ask the First Minister what engagements he has planned for the rest of the day. First
Minister.
Well, today I have great pleasure in joining Doosan Power Systems in Renfrew to welcome their planned £170 million investment in an offshore wind research centre of excellence and research and development, which, along with the steel engineering announcement at the same site, will deliver over 300 jobs for Renfrew today, and the Memorandum of Understanding signed with Doosan expects to see 1,700 new jobs for Scotland in this great technology in which we lead the world.
Ian Gray.
Today we meet to squeeze 2 bills in at the end of the First Minister's time in government. But thousands of Scots are still waiting for his bill to abolish their student debt. What happened to that? That was a bigger promise than Nick Clegg made to students in England. It was a £2 billion promise. Or as the First Minister likes to have it, a £2,000 million promise. Did it just slip his mind, or did he never have any intention of ever bringing that bill forward?
First Minister.
Well, as Ian Gray well knows, this government moved in legislation to abolish Labour's backdoor tuition fees in Scotland.
Order. Order.
I'm glad that the Chamber is keeping up with the Labour Party positioning in this matter, because tuition fees in Scotland have gone from being inevitable, so said the Labour spokesman a few weeks ago, to being one of the pledges in Labour's pledge card in a matter of weeks. I welcome Ian Gray's conversion to the principle of free education in Scotland, fought for and defended and introduced by the Scottish National Party.
Ian Gray.
No, Presiding Officer. Tuition fees were abolished here in...
Order.
Tuition fees were abolished by this Parliament in 2000. I was there.
Order.
The First Minister was there because it was just before he ran off to Westminster. And I voted for it. He abstained. He abstained when we abolished tuition fees. We're still waiting on his crazy local income tax bill too. What happened to that? Did he run out of time, or did he just realise that it was unfair, unworkable and unwanted? It would hit working families with a 30% hike in their income tax. Does he still think it's a good idea?
First Minister.
Well, let's start with the record, because the record is important in these matters. Labour introduced backdoor tuition fees in Scotland. Well, if Ian Gray hadn't voted for and introduced backdoor tuition fees from the Labour Party, we wouldn't have had to move to abolish them in 2007. And I really don't think that Ian Gray is going to persuade many students that they weren't paying backdoor fees under the Labour Party. Now, if the Labour Party's position is, of course, we only introduced front-end fees in England and just backdoor fees in Scotland, then I think you're going to have some difficulty with the student population, no more than anyone will believe. Labour's last-minute conversion to free education. Now, of course, another conversion recently has been on the question of the council tax freeze. And it also appears in Labour's pledge card. I think you'll have to be very careful of the Trades Description Act. Labour's pledge card turns out to be what the SNP have delivered in office in Scotland.
Ian Gray. Order.
Presiding Officer, Labour introduced support for students from low-income families. That's what he abolished. That's what he abolished. And if he wants, let's go out. The students are outside. Let's go out and let's see him explain to them why he didn't abolish their student debt the way he promised 4 years ago. But let's go to the very core of Mr Salmon's beliefs. I always thought the First Minister was a proud separatist. So why are we still waiting on his referendum bill? We've lost count of how many times it was definitely coming to this Parliament. And now, one of the First Minister's favourite commentators is writing, the SNP are no longer a serious party of separation. Is that true? Is that why the referendum never appeared? Has the Scottish Government had a deathbed conversion to the Union?
First Minister.
I would have thought, after so many attempts at First Minister's question, that Ian Gray would have realised you shouldn't wander from subject to subject, but try to articulate the questions on front of the country. The SNP's policy for education in Scotland has now been adopted by the Labour Party in this Parliament. I welcome that, but I really do think Ian Gray should have a pause for thought of wondering if his deathbed conversion is going to give him any credibility with the student of Scotland. And I am happy to confirm that the Scottish National Party will offer the people of Scotland the right to vote on their own constitutional future.
Ian Gray.
After 92 times at this, you would think the First Minister would have realised by now that I get to choose what the questions are about. But his turn is coming soon enough. And isn't the referendum? Isn't the referendum the problem of the last 4 years? 4 years distracted by a referendum that never was, while unemployment in Scotland raced ahead of the rest of the country. A national conversation nonsense, while youth unemployment soared by 350%. And teachers and nurses cut while budgets were rising. And now we've had 4 weeks of frantic announcements, held back and timed for partisan party advantage. Well, it doesn't make up. Well, it doesn't make up for 4 years of promises broken, schools unbuilt, projects cancelled, criminals released, and thousands extra on the dole. Time's up. Hasn't the First Minister failed on all the issues that really matter to the people of Scotland?
Order, First Minister.
I mean, Ian Gray should get a say. I've got no complaints at all with the questions he reads out week after week. They're absolutely brilliant from our point of view. But let's take his claim on schools. And I want to be absolutely precise about this answer. Page 26 of the Labour Party manifesto at the last election, 250 more schools to be built. As Ian Gray will remember, we promised to match that brick for brick. I am delighted to announce that this very evening, Michael Russell will open Golden Hill Primary in Clydebank. The 330th school administration. Ian Gray should really have the grace. You should really have the grace to welcome the employment announcements which I've been bringing to this chamber. These are good news for Scotland. But I've been looking at his record when he was Enterprise Minister. He was Enterprise Minister. Ian Gray's top employment figure in Scotland in all the time he was Enterprise Minister was 2,407,000. Employment in Scotland is now substantially higher than that, 2,480,000 in Scotland. Now, in it does seem to me that after a world recession, which the Labour Party played a substantial part in the government, if we've managed to achieve an employment total after 8 months of rising employment in Scotland, which is higher than Ian Gray did as Enter Prime Minister, then he should learn to welcome that achievement. It was also the case that as Enterprise Minister in Scotland, he managed to take Scotland into recession.
Order,
the rest of the world didn't have one. And these employment figures are only one of the reasons that this government will be re-elected. And the Daily Record had the grace to say this morning, welcoming terrific announcement that this government's on fire as it goes to the people of Scotland.
Question 2, Annabel Goldie.
To ask the First Minister when he will next meet the Prime Minister.
First Minister.
I've no plans to meet the Prime Minister in the near future.
Presiding Officer, when I met with the Prime Minister on Friday, the Libyan situation was obviously uppermost in our minds, and I know the Prime Minister's decisions reflect the overwhelming sentiment of political parties and politicians here in Scotland, but I'm sure the thoughts of everyone in this chamber are with our brave men and women in our armed services. Presiding Officer, in the last 4 years, I've asked the First Minister almost 300 questions. Now, occasionally, he has found the right page in his big book of notes. Occasionally, he has listened to the sweet nothings of Miss Sturgeon in one ear and the murmurings of Mr. Swinney in the other. But rarely has he found the right answer. So let me give him one last chance. Now, I remember the SNP at one point were only going to give us 500 more police officers, but then they saw sense and increased that to 1,000. What changed the First Minister's mind?
First Minister.
We determined to have 1,000 more officers in the streets and communities of Scotland so that we could reduce recorded crime in this country to a 30-year low. I think, and I'm freely to acknowledge that Annabel Goldie's party did vote for that in this chamber and did support it. I have to say that there have been other votes, the council tax freeze, for example, where Annabel Goldie's party did vote for that as well. I was grateful about that, particularly because that council tax freeze didn't appear on the Conservative Party's manifesto in 2007. Therefore, I was slightly surprised to see Annabel Goldie at a conference at the weekend seem to claim that as a Conservative Party policy. One wonders at what point did Annabel Goldie decide that a council tax freeze was a good thing for the Scottish people?
Annabel Goldie.
Well, just to refresh the First Minister's memory, of course, without the Scottish Conservatives, we'd never have got 1,000 extra police. We'd have been stuck with the broken promise of the First Minister. But the bottom line is that facts are facts, and in this Parliament, because of the Scottish Conservatives, in addition to these police, yes, we have voted for a council tax freeze, we have voted for help for small business, for a town centre regeneration fund, for a new national drug strategy, and a £26 million boost to business, construction and housing, all delivered by Scottish Conservative votes, and we have made the difference. And all these common sense policies and more delivered by the Scottish Conservatives were credible and they were costed. Does the First Minister agree that credible and costed should be the watchwords of all politicians in the weeks ahead, and that all politicians need to be straight with the voters and tell it like it is?
First Minister.
But then Mr Swinney, of course, is the Finance Minister who's delivered a budget which is balanced over the last 4 years, and I'm quite certain as Finance Minister he'll be prepared to do that for the next 5 years. Now, Annabel Goldie shouldn't underrate her persuasive powers, because it is true that in order to deliver the council tax freeze, then the votes of the Conservative members in this chamber were very, very important indeed. But now, of course, we have the votes of the Labour Party members as well, because that joint articulation of the benefits to families in Scotland has finally got home to the Labour Party just a few weeks before we go to the polls. So I don't want to say in any sense that Annabel Goldie's support is redundant or superfluous, but in the next government, we in the SNP can confidently look forward to the support of the Labour Party in opposition in implementing our policies.
Question 3, Tavish Scott.
Presiding Officer, to ask the First Minister when he will next meet the Secretary of State for Scotland.
First Minister.
No plans to meet the Secretary of Scotland in the course of today.
Tavish Scott.
Presiding Officer, this Parliament ends its session, as it did 8 years ago, with men and women from our armed forces in conflict. But this time the war is not illegal, it is based on a UN Security Council resolution. That's the difference between now and the illegal war in Iraq that the previous Labour government prosecuted, splitting the nation. The First Minister this week issued a government statement on Libya. Can he tell us his position on the Scottish military bases?
First Minister.
Well, I strongly support our air bases which are under threat at the present moment. But can I just respond broader to Tavish Scott's question? I think everyone in this chamber supports the position of our armed services who are called into combat, particularly when they're called into combat, as in present circumstances, to protect the lives of others. I fully accept and support, as Tavish Scott well knows, the point that he makes about the importance of the United Nations mandate and the legality of conflict. And that's important not just in terms of getting international support, which is reflected, of course, within the UN resolution. It's important in point to get as much domestic consensus as possible. And he and I will both agree there is a world of a difference in sending brave men and women into battle and conflict to pursue a United Nations mandate with the united support of the population in pursuit of the international community's obligations than to have a divisive and legal conflict like the Iraq War. That seems to me the most substantial difference of all, in terms not just of the honesty of purpose, but the legality of the conflict.
Tavish Scott.
Well, I obviously support those words in relation to the legality of the current position, and indeed on the basis where I will certainly continue to make that case. There is broad cross-party agreement about the importance to Scotland of our soldiers, sailors and aircrew. The jobs, both militarily and in support, are very important to many Scottish communities. The First Minister will know that a Royal Navy Trafalgar-class submarine has launched cruise missiles at anti-aircraft defences in Libya this week. Trafalgar submarines and their successor Astutes are to be based in Scotland at Faslane. Does the First Minister welcome and support those submarines and all the associated jobs being based on the Clyde?
First Minister.
Well, as Tavish Scott should well know, that we have never argued against conventional weaponry at the Faslane base. Indeed, he and I, along with the other party leaders, put forward that point of view in our joint submission in the documentation we submitted on the Armed Force Services Review. I think at a time, incidentally, when our armed forces are being called into conflict, that we should be very careful not to trespass into party political arguments on this, particularly because, well, particularly because the bases which are under threat in Scotland are not under threat from this Parliament or this administration.
Take a supplementary from Jack McConnell.
With your permission, Presiding Officer, and I expect here I may be speaking for all retiring MSPs, in advance of my question, can I take this opportunity to thank the staff of the Parliament for their support these past 12 years. In my case, and in the case of some others, the civil servants, the ministers and the special advisers who supported us in our time. In particular, Eilish Angelini, who I see is here today and is also retiring this spring after breaking new ground as Solicitor General and Lord Advocate. My own constituency and research staff and MSPs across all parties who have been many times kind and given great support to me over these 12 years in this Parliament. I'd like in particular though, to thank the people of Scotland for the opportunity they've given me to lead their government and this country, for the honour of being First Minister and the privilege of being MSP for Motherwell and Wishaw. I hope that at the end of these 12 years, more Scots walk a little taller, cringe a little less, and do occasionally have ideas above their station. Last week, Presiding Officer, my 17-year-old constituent, Jane Copeland, won 2 awards, Youth Volunteer of the Year and Youth Worker of the Year. She assists the local Girls' Brigade, the Boys' Brigade and the local dancing class. She volunteers in an elderly nursing home and the paediatric unit of Wishaw General Hospital. She learned British Sign Language so that she could talk to her deaf granny. And she raised over £600 for the Teenage Cancer Trust last year because she had had personal use of their services. She represents what is and can be good about young Scots and the future of our country. I'd like to ask the First Minister to congratulate her.
First Minister.
Well, let me willingly congratulate Jack McConnell's constituent. That is a tremendous story, an inspiring story for us all, and an example we should all follow. Can I say, I'll get the opportunity perhaps in a few minutes to say a word about the departing MSPs in general, but can I just pay a particular tribute to my predecessor as First Minister, Jack McConnell. Perhaps we agreed on rather more than we were ever prepared to admit when we were crossing swords, but there's no doubt he has made, as First Minister and as a member, a substantial contribution to this Parliament and a very substantial contribution to Scottish society, and we wish him well.
Question 4, Kenneth Gibson.
To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government has done to support job creation over the last 4 years.
First Minister.
Well, a range of measures, because job creation and employment is at the forefront of our policy programme. But I'd like to point in particular to the 300,000 training opportunities since May 2007, including next year's record 25,000 modern apprenticeships. In terms of the range of employment provisions, that level of training and that level of modern apprenticeships will fit this country well for the future.
Kenneth Gibson.
I thank the First Minister for his reply. First Minister, according to Scottish Enterprise, between May 2005 and May 2007, 1,733 jobs were lost in North Ayrshire through 28 major redundancies. During that time, Cunningham North was represented in this Parliament by the Deputy Minister for Enterprise, Alan Wilson. Labour-controlled North Ayrshire Council held power here in Holyrood and were in government at Westminster. So many livelihoods were lost even before the recession, caused by Labour's chronic mismanagement of the world's largest...
Order. Could you come to a question, please, Mr Gibson?
Began. Does the First Minister agree that this litany of Labour economic incompetence shows that Scotland's economy is not safe in their hands and that it is vital to secure the re-election of an SNP government committed to investing in skills, infrastructure and our small businesses to tackle the scourge of unemployment?
First Minister.
Yes, I do agree with that. As I think we should all welcome 8 months of rising employment in Scotland, as we should welcome the considerable number of very positive and major jobs announcements. You know, as we look forward as a Parliament, as a society to the future, then we should be able to demonstrate from the position that Scotland now has in some of the cutting-edge technologies which will generate the energy future of the 21st century, that this nation is well placed across a range of these activities. And one thing I hope that the Parliament increasingly will unite behind, the thing that will allow us as a country, as a lucky country, with huge natural resources and a talented people, is to get the financial and economic powers which will allow us to maximise that great opportunity.
John Scott.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The First Minister recognises the need for job creation in Ayrshire, and nowhere is that more important than at Prestwick Airport in my constituency. Does he agree with me in the light of the recent strategic use of Prestwick Airport for Royal Air Force needs, and also keeping Scotland's commercial airspace open over the past 2 winters, that the strategic importance of Prestwick Airport needs to be recognised both at a Scottish Government and UK Government level in terms of the jobs the Prestwick Airport supports, both directly and indirectly?
First Minister.
Well, John Scott knows my interest in Prestwick Airport, and he knows also that I visited recently. We should think of the airport, valuable, vital though that is, not just as an airport, but as part of an aerospace hub. And I know that John Scott particularly welcomed the major £8 million investment by Ryanair, which makes Prestwick its engineering hub for the whole of Europe. It's investments such as that which will secure the future of Prestwick and of Ayrshire.
Jeremy Purvis.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. 3 of the jobs that have been created have been the highest paid in the public sector, the 3 top bosses of government bodies, under contracts signed by his ministers with terms and conditions set by his ministers. Does the First Minister believe that the combined salary of £600,000 plus bonuses is the fair amount, or is there a case to reduce the top pay of the top paid in the public sector?
First Minister.
Well, the member well knows the measures that John Swinney has announced to freeze pay of top civil servants and people across the public sector. I would have hoped it would have carried the support of Jeremy Purvis.
Question 5, Andy Kerr.
to ask the First Minister what support the Scottish Government is offering to first-time home buyers.
Minister.
Well, a variety of schemes supported by the Scottish Government over the past 4 years to help first-time buyers, such as the new supply shared equity, open market shared equity, shared ownership, providing ownership support in rural areas. Over that time, we have supported over 6,400 households to buy a home, compared to just over 4,000 households in the previous 4 years.
Andy Kerr.
Of course, what the First Minister did not mention, of course, was his SNP manifesto commitment to introduce a first-time home buyers grant of £2,000. He couldn't mention that because he didn't do it and didn't offer the support. So, First Minister, when we return to this place in 6 weeks or so time, will he take the opportunity from the opposition benches to support Labour's plans to help and offer real support to first-time home buyers, get their first foot in the property ladder, a measure supported by many in the financial services and construction industry?
First Minister.
Now, surely he forgot to mention SNP-led East Lothian Council, which has introduced just such a scheme in the last week. But of course, that money, that investment, £300 million over the last 4 years, through schemes such as new supply, the open market, shared equity, shared ownership, and the rural home ownership grants, which I mentioned. Now, as Andy Kerr well knows, we put the Firm Foundations document out to consultation, and a range of experts and organisations told us to devote the resources to the schemes I've outlined. They also told us to restart a council house building programme in Scotland, which is why, of course, we're providing funding over these last 4 years for 3,300 council houses. The Labour Party, as Andy Kerr will well remember, managed to build 6.
Anne McLaughlin.
Does the First Minister agree that getting onto the housing ladder would be considerably easier had Labour ensured a proper supply across all tenures during their time in office? When the Scottish people examine the record on housing of this SNP government and that of the previous Labour executive, which does he think offers a more promising future for housing over the next parliamentary term?
First Minister.
Yes, but the SNP, but so do people in the housing sector. Now, when the member was making her point, I heard another intervention from Andy Kerr denying the fact that Labour refused to build the houses for its housing policy. I find this quite remarkable, because there was, of course, the quote from Ian Gray in an unexpected moment of candour. The Herald newspaper, 21st of August 2008, quote, "We had the best homelessness registration in the world, but we didn't build the housing to make it work." Now, if even the Labour Party leader admits that Labour didn't build the houses, I think the Scottish people will come to the same conclusion.
Question 6, Murdo Fraser.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I ask the First Minister whether the Scottish Government considers that planning guidelines for renewable energy projects strike a balance between the interests of developers and those of local communities?
First Minister.
Well, the Scottish Government works with planners and communities to ensure the correct balance is struck between the interests of developers and local communities in considering applications for renewable energy projects. We are determined to ensure that Scotland's local communities enjoy the benefits of increased renewable energy generation. And I'm sure that the Murdo Fraser will join me in welcoming the work that's been undertaken by the Scottish Government to ensure that communities do so benefit.
Murdo Fraser.
Thank you. Notwithstanding the First Minister's response, he should be aware that communities up and down Scotland feel under siege from speculative wind farm planning applications in the absence of clear locational planning guidance. Now, the SNP manifesto in 2007 pledged a nationwide assessment of renewable sites, but that has not been delivered. Should the First Minister be re-elected, will he keep his promise this time, or will this require to be a matter for post-election negotiations?
First Minister.
Planning guidelines, as Murdo Fraser should well know, have been substantially clarified over the last 4 years in terms of that objective. Now, today, as Murdo Fraser also knows, that major renewable developments come to the government for consent. And I'm delighted to say that today the Energy Minister has now approved the 41st major renewable project under this administration. That's twice the level of the previous administration. And all I'd say to Murdo Fraser, that we believe that as part of a green economy of over 100,000 jobs created between now and 2020, at least 40 to 50,000 of these will be generated, for example, by the offshore wind developments and, indeed, the facilities that are being put in place to allow Scotland's renewables to reach the marketplace. Now, I'm sure that most people, maybe everyone in this chamber, wants to see the jobs. I'd merely say as gently as possible to Murdo Fraser that you can't have the jobs unless you're prepared to approve the developments. And if he takes a position against major investments in this industry, then by definition, he takes a position against Scotland having tens of thousands of jobs in this industry.
Karen Gillan, briefly, please.
Does the First Minister accept that the decision to remove the automatic right of notification for communities where plans are out with the development plan at the stroke of a ministerial pen without consultation with this Parliament has been a retrograde step?
First Minister.
No, I think the planning guidelines are a substantial improvement on what has gone before. And I would urge Karen Gillan, since she represents communities where there have and are to be major projects, that she, I hope, contributed to the Scottish Government's consultation on exactly how community benefits can be further enhanced, because that is certainly the way forward. So if she argues that there should be a more defined community benefit onshore, if she is prepared to join with us in arguing for the Crown Estate Commission to be brought under Scottish Parliament control, then she'll find a willing ear from this First Minister. But that would seem to me to be the productive way to go forward to secure the benefits of this renewable revolution.